This week, Tony Karam from Lacework is with us to discuss how infrastructure as code is changing cloud security for the better. Then, Dan Frechtling from Boltive joins us to talk about why U.S. data privacy is getting overhauled in 2023. Finally, in the enterprise security news, we catch up on 2 weeks of news, starting with 18 funding rounds and several new products. Splunk acquires TwinWave. Another ASM vendor, TemplarBit, gets acquired into the cyber insurance industry. InfoSec layoffs continue in a big way alongside huge cuts at Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. Microsoft sued for stealing code to train GitHub Copilot. Google sued for tracking when users asked them not to. Apple sued for violating privacy when users asked them not to. A bit of a trend there. Taking away kids' smartphones, stealing passwords from Mastodon, and should cryptocurrency die in a fire? All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Customers want fast and frictionless digital experiences, yet also expect protection against breaches, privacy violations, and fraud. Drive engagement by optimizing security and convenience to attract and retain customers. Use the PingOne cloud platform to build, test, and optimize digital experiences. The no-code orchestration engine weaves together authentication, user management, and MFA, all of which can enhance security, drive engagement, and boost revenues. Visit securityweekly.com/ping identity to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Butter Day. This is episode 297, recorded on Thursday, November 17th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm highly caffeinated.
I know you said, but how does that align with World Butter Day?
So, there's this thing called bulletproof coffee. Have you ever heard of this thing?
I have, hence my leading question.
I didn't intend for it to align with National Butter Day, but it does. I tried this thing once, and I read some posts about it, but it's a thing that's supposed to be healthy, where you take like a whole stick of butter and just blend it with black coffee and drink it. A whole stick. Like,
it sounds weird, but at the same time, I'm kind of tempted.
Yeah, it's do it once, sure. It's delicious, but I don't think anybody should be consuming a stick of butter a day.
Perhaps not the best thing for one's arteries.
Yeah, there's some folks who experimented with it, and it's supposed to be like a health hack. But there's some folks who experimented with it, and they're like, yeah, cholesterol kind of went crazy after I started doing that. So
surprising.
I did it once. It's an interesting taste. I prefer my black coffee just black coffee. I don't put any.
You sure you prefer your black coffee black?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and flavored coffee flavored as well.
Excellent.
I'm one of those. Also joining us is my, speaking of caffeine, my good friend Guillaume agreed to stand in as emergency co-host today. Hello, Guillaume. How are you?
Hey, I was doing great until you mentioned butter coffee. I think I'm just going to drink some water.
And I mentioned you had a company called Caffeine Security, so that's what made me think of you when
Yeah,
were talking
and it
about,
still exists. That's where when I make training for Pluralsight and all that, that's all through my company, Caffeine Security.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize you kept it around. Awesome. All right. Quick announcement here, Security Weekly listeners. We need to hear your voices. Leave us your feedback on Apple Podcasts and submit a screenshot to our giveaway form for a chance to win a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. The giveaway will be open until the end of the year. And we appreciate your honest feedback. If you've got suggestions or criticism, that's fine. If you just want to leave a great glowing review, that's also fine. But yeah, we'd love the feedback. It really helps people looking for a podcast to follow. If we do have some kind of feedback on there. And that form is at securityweekly.com/giveaway is where you can enter that contest. All right. Today's topic is on infrastructure as code and how it's changing cloud security for the better. We're excited to have Tony, and I hope I said that right. I should have asked you before, but is it Karam?
It's Karam, but that's okay. Close enough.
Aram.
You're in the ball.
Okay.
Yeah, you're in the
Aram.
ballpark. It's all good.
Yeah. I should have asked. So Tony Karam is the principal product marketing manager at Lacework. Tony has spent more than 25 years in marketing and product roles covering data protection, vuln management, IAM, and cloud security. And finally, he's a big believer that security takes a village, which amen to that. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I thought a good place to start here. We've talked about infrastructure as code on the show before, but I know it's for a lot of our listeners, it still might be one of those terms that you hear, but you don't really kind of fully understand what that means. Infrastructure as code, or you might just have a rough idea. So I thought it might be good to kind of level set, lay some foundation, and talk about what infrastructure as code means. What that actually is.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So, historically, infrastructure was configured and managed manually, right? Engineers were responsible for developing network and system architectures. Database folks were responsible for spinning up databases, implementing them using physical servers, and maintaining them throughout, their life cycle. And infrastructure as code's really changed all that. So now using tools, infrastructure as code tools like Terraform or CloudFormation or Pulumi, developers and engineers can automate that entire process. It's possible for them to programmatically spin up resources, especially in the cloud for sure, to spin up resources very quickly and spin down or destroy resources very quickly as well. This gives them a really high level of autonomy to self-service building out cloud infrastructure. So using those tools, again, that I mentioned, they can quickly orchestrate the compute, storage, database, and other resources that their application needs without really involving other teams that used to be involved in that process.
So it sounds extremely powerful. And of course, anytime something is extremely powerful and we're talking about infrastructure and automation, it should also terrify you, right?
Exactly.
Man, you can cause damage at some serious scale here if you get something wrong or somebody gets access to your infrastructure as code scripts. Do we call them scripts? Configuration
for sure.
files?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of the gates certainly from a security perspective, security used to rely on gates and handoffs between teams as sort of checkpoints to secure code and other things. And yeah, those sort of checkpoints and handoffs have evaporated. Right, there's a lot of power that's been put in the hands of, software developers, platform engineers, infrastructure engineers. There's a lot of goodness that can come out of it, but it needs to be managed accordingly.
Well, I guess there's a lot of advantages where you can keep things much cleaner and much safer, but it does create a situation where it's like the keys to the kingdom, right? Like any management system with so much power will definitely be a target. Like your CI/CD is a target. Now, if you're doing infrastructure as code, your infrastructure can be targeted through that. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, but I definitely prefer one of the sides of it, if one can say that, right? Like just having an infrastructure that's so much cleaner because everything's automated, code reviewed, but then you got to be careful, who or what has the ability to push these changes out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. When you look at sort of the inherent benefits, or at least the inherent security benefits, there's a lot of speed, performance speed, sort of time to market benefits with infrastructure as code. If you kind of look at security benefits, clearly, because it all relies on automation, right? You eliminate a lot of the human error that might be involved otherwise, right? So that clearly eliminates some of the risk associated with building out infrastructure. It also ensures, Guillaume, like you were just talking about, that you can consistently provision the same or very similar environments every single time. And again, and because it's code, it can be easily documented, it can be version controlled, it can be audited, managed. It helps avoid ad hoc configuration changes, which can cause organizations a lot of angst and pain and problems. And then finally, I think it also promotes this idea of immutable infrastructure, where organizations are really trying to lock down sort of what good looks like and restrict making configuration changes to infrastructure outside of a well-defined, process, a pipeline process, for sure.
So we
Amy,
know that
you had
automation is the key to scalability and efficiency. But for many years, it's caused security people and a lot of IT people a lot of heart palpitations. And while we talk about it and everybody knows it's the only way to scale, it's the only way to deal with the hiring issues that we have, there is, as you mentioned, some angst around it. So when you're talking about this, when you're talking about the automation part of it, what are some of the areas of resistance that you get, and how are you overcoming them? And then on the flip side, what are the areas that users are willing to accept, and where do they want to implement that manual oversight?
Yeah, I think I would say, like, automation, the word automation in general can be scary for security people, right? I think in general. So I think, making sure, I think there's two sides to this. I think there's some natural, like we talked about, benefits from a security perspective for infrastructure as code. However, I think you need to be very cognizant that because you're sort of moving the keys to the kingdom or giving a lot of power to developers and people building sort of infrastructure, you absolutely have to be constantly checking, to make sure that what they're building is, one, what you expect, and two, what you want from a security and compliance perspective. So for me, I think it's about overlaying on top of the inherent benefits that infrastructure as code provides, because it's codified and because now it can be automated. I think the task really is to bring security automation now left, if you would, as far left as you can, sort of to match the automation and speed at which organizations are spinning up infrastructure, right? So being able to take rules and policies and checks and be able to apply those checks to make sure that you're meeting either internal standards or best practices or external standards and best practices.
Did these facts, this natural skepticism, did they slow down the adoption process at all? Are we still in an educational phase of what infrastructure as code is? Or are we at a rapid rate of adoption yet? Where are we in that curve?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, anything that has to do, well, from a security perspective, is certainly seems to be evolutionary in its growth, not revolutionary in its growth, for sure. But I would say, if you look at infrastructure as code just at its face and put security concerns or issues aside for a moment, I would say, if you look back about 3 or 4 years ago-ish, there was probably less than, I would say, 10% of companies that were really using infrastructure as code in a meaningful way, right? In what's meaningful? Meaningful is probably, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20% of their applications, they were using infrastructure as code sort of to provision those applications and services. And that's changed quite a bit. I pulled a statistic just recently to kind of prep for this. And, ESG just recently published a study around sort of shift left and infrastructure as code in particular. And they talk about the fact that today about 20% of organizations use infrastructure as code for 50% of more of their applications. So that's a big jump, I think, in the past few years. And that number, is going to sort of exponentially increase to about 2 out of 3. So 2/3 of organizations expect within the next 24 months that they'll be using infrastructure as code to provision more than 50% of their applications and services. So within a 5-year span, we've gone from something that's relatively nascent, early adopter type technology to something that's very widespread, in my opinion.
Yeah, so something that's really interesting. Sorry, I'll hand off to you in a second.
I was just going to ask, you said you think it's going to keep increasing. I totally agree with that. What do you think will be like the long tail of the stuff that just refuses to become managed over infrastructure as code? I think like on the server side, especially as things are moving to like containers, Kubernetes, cloud just makes it very easy. But I think on the endpoint side, right? Like people still use MDM that has like clicky UIs. Then there's probably a whole bunch of enterprise apps, the stuff that you buy off the shelf. Your HR software, all of that is probably not that easy to deploy on infrastructure as code. Probably still requires like VMs that are very specific to that. So what do you think is like the next thing that will finally get IaC, if that's a verb? And then what's the last thing that will refuse to get IaC'd?
Yeah. So specifically, I'm not sure if I can answer specifics. What I would say is, it kind of, I look at it as following similar path to cloud. So, there's a big rush to cloud. Everybody's moving applications. Most people are moving applications to cloud, but there's certainly a number of core applications, enterprise applications that might never make their way to cloud for lots of different reasons. Whether because, larger organizations have built these very complex nested environments that they really don't want to touch or really can't figure out, best ways to sort of move them or don't see economical reasons to move them. I would say it's probably similar for, these, what I would consider cloud native technologies. I know infrastructure as code can be used in lots of other places, not just cloud, but relative to cloud adoption, I would think, they would follow sort of the same suit.
Yeah, I think, an interesting trend I'm seeing here is an actual metric, that I've seen some boards now asking companies about, particularly startups in the age of ransomware extortion, the kinds of attacks that can threaten to take down infrastructure. What's the time frame to reboot the business? So kind of like a business continuity metric now is like not just switch over to a DR environment. A lot of cloud first organizations are, kind of live failover to other cloud regions and things like that. But actually just standing everything up from scratch is kind of like a desirable thing from a chaos engineering or a site reliability engineering standpoint. I'm seeing more and more of that these days. Some kind of expectation that, yes, that's something that you can do and that you test it and that okay, we can do it in a day or so many hours.
Yeah, It's essentially you're reducing the need for backing up a lot, right? You back up the data, some configurations and everything else is in infrastructure as code, but that means that your code repository is now the absolute one thing you must protect, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's becoming more and more of a target, right? The whole supply chain, especially, repositories as well are becoming a target. I look at, like we were talking about the growth a little bit. So I look at the growth of sort of this and, from my lens, from the Lacework lens, because we're all about cloud, I would say, it's been about 10 years since Mark Anderson wrote an essay entitled Software is Eating the World. And, if you fast forward to today, you can make the argument that most companies need a software strategy to effectively compete in whatever market they play in, and certainly to open up new markets or new categories. And if cloud is becoming sort of the dominant place where, software is, either written or configured or managed or run, then you'd argue every company is in essence almost a cloud company, or at least needs an effective cloud strategy, which is really evidenced by the growth in things like infrastructure as a service, and then, cloud native technologies, including things like infrastructure as code and containers and microservices architectures. So I think, cloud is really a driving force in growing the use of infrastructure as code.
Yeah, so I want to ask a few quick foundational questions, and then jump to the kind of stuff that you actually find and that you're looking for when you scan infrastructure as code. I'm only aware of a few infrastructure as code tools here. Generally, I hear Terraform and CloudFormation when this is mentioned. So, kind of the question there: are there any other tools that we should be aware of? That you can scan. And then the other side, the other foundational thing is infrastructure as code specifically a cloud thing, or are people using it for both private workloads, that they run in their own data centers or maybe colos and things like that, as well as public cloud providers?
Yeah, so I would say sort of on the first piece. So there are a lot of infrastructure as code tools out there. Again, we mentioned things like Terraform and CloudFormation. CloudFormation's, sort of AWS's version. There's ARM. I think they renamed it to Bicep, which is Microsoft's sort of version. And Google has their own language as well. In addition, there's open source tools like Pulumi. There's other tools like Ansible. So there's a number of these products out in the marketplace for sure. Things we're looking for, or when we're scanning infrastructure as code from a security and compliance standpoint, I would say, we're looking for things like misconfigurations, like unsecured data storage elements or containers, excessive permissions and privileges, default credentials in configuration settings left unchanged, hard-coded secrets, unrestricted access to ports in services, and certainly unsecured secrets. So there's certainly a number of things that companies are looking for when they scan infrastructure as code. And there's a number of standards out there, benchmarks like, the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, has benchmarks that they provide that folks can use. CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, has CCM, which is a control catalog of a bunch of control objectives that folks can use. And there's a few other best practices out there.
So you're scanning in the code, you're essentially scanning for pretty much everything that a cloud security solution would be scanning on things that are currently running, right? Except you're doing it before the stuff even runs.
Yeah, so it's very synonymous to, right, like a cloud security posture management tool would look at, configuration of all your resources that are active in cloud, but it does it in runtime. So you're doing something very similar, except you're doing it in build time before deployment.
Right. So let's kind of shift to talking about the kind of stuff that you're finding in here. Like I assume credentials are a thing that you probably would find in infrastructure as code. What are some of the other security issues that you're finding with these scanners?
Yeah, so certainly, like I was mentioning, credentials are something we find. We find, companies, hard-coded secrets is certainly a challenge or a problem, right? It's easier sometimes for developers to actually hard code secrets because they know applications and service accounts need those secrets or those passwords, right, to do the jobs that they need to do. Certainly, excessive permissions is something we look for. So, in cloud, looking for, wildcards, in other things like that, which can be no-nos. You certainly want to restrict access to resources and data, certainly within the cloud. Other things also, like just the fact that basic security tools or basic security settings are turned off, or things like logging is turned off or not enabled for organizations, which then makes it really, really hard to investigate incidents after the fact. I think, again, some of the most basic things around data protection, for sure. So are storage buckets enabled for encryption, right? Are, keys being rotated through key management systems? Are they being rotated based on whatever policy an organization has every 30, 60, or 90 days? Are those encryption keys managed by the cloud customer, not the cloud service provider, right? So those are some of the things we're looking for or find.
Okay, yeah. So as Guillaume was saying, a lot of it is, the same kinds of issues that you would have even if you weren't using infrastructure as code, right? Like a lot of these are cloud security best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. The one advantage to, obviously, there's several advantages to scanning infrastructure as code before it goes out the door. But certainly when you're talking about cloud and, you're talking about a very ripe environment, I think, attackers, bad actors and attackers can find misconfigurations in public cloud environments very quickly, within minutes. They can find and exploit them within minutes. So from a security and risk management perspective, right, you want to limit the attack surface as much as you can, and doing that in development or in the pipeline before things get deployed is just becomes really good practice. I would say, I was talking to a CISO of a large financial services organization, and he kind of eloquently, made the statement around how misconfiguration in cloud can be so dangerous. He said, no matter how you configure a NAS device running in your data center, there's no command you can give that you're going to make things world accessible, right? But he said that there's just too many layers between the device and the outside world. But somewhere like AWS, it's just one S3 bucket misconfiguration and your data is out there for everybody to see, right? So it's trying to avoid that event before those vulnerabilities or misconfigurations become exploitable.
And then another big advantage of IaC is limiting the need for access to production environments. How often do you see companies that are completely preventing access, like SSH access into running containers or VMs, because everything has to be done through IaC, the logs are there for investigation, and then the containers are supposed to be immutable, and therefore we just eliminated a pretty big like insider threat with access to the service accounts that are live and access to the data and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the goal, right? For organizations, most organizations, I think if folks would be honest, I think for some organizations that's still, that's still a little bit of what I would say a North Star, or aspirational. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. It's a little bit aspirational, and we continue to see, unfortunately, and there's good reasons sometimes, but folks having to go into production environments to make changes. And some of those are valid, very valid reasons for them to do that, and others are not. So I think you're right. I think the real goal is to build this idea of a continuous pipeline built around immutable infrastructure. If somebody wants to make changes, they have to make them from the beginning, right? In the dev world, in the build world, and not in production.
So something your colleague mentioned when we did the prep call originally for this is it's shift left, not shove left. You want to add some?
I'll mention that. Yeah.
Oh, that was you that mentioned that. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to add some color to that on what that means?
Yeah. I think to me, it's like, one of the things that will help organizations secure infrastructure as code, secure their cloud environments, was really better collaboration between, development teams, operation teams, security teams, right? Everybody, I don't want to use the word DevSecOps because it's so overused. But, I think fostering this collaboration between specifically development and security teams is really important. For the most part, I would say shift left has probably felt more like shove left for developers. Organizations historically, we're asking them to adopt these foreign security tools that disrupt their workflows, that slow them down. We expect them to build, perfect from a security and risk management perspective, code that's safe, but without having, really a good understanding of the security requirements and the checks that they need to perform, and certainly not including them in the process doesn't help build bridges. So, I think there's been a lot of confusion around, who owns what, especially in cloud. Cloud's a team sport. Everybody's sort of all in the pool. And so I think, building tools, infrastructure as code, security tools, similar to what Lacework provides, that really takes the developer experience and developer workflows and puts those sort of in the front, because we know that's the only way it's really going to work, is if developers can use tools, they stay within their existing workflows, they don't have to do a bunch of context switching, they don't have to guess at what security policies and rules to apply, they're already set for them. So when they basically commit code into, they commit code or do a PR, they're automatically checking their code against some already set policies or rules that security's kind of implemented.
And you probably can do it under IDE directly, right? Like, why even wait for someone to check in the code or file a PR?
Yep, that's right. So you want to do it as early as possible. So at IDE, when they're building or checking in code in the pipeline itself, because maybe there's some parameters like where this thing might run, US West, US East, that might not be known. Again, what we try to do is provide companies all the flexibility they need. So depending on where they want to, start checking, we recommend checking as far left as possible. But based on their structure and how they've built sort of their pipeline, we allow them to kind of stick these automated checks in everywhere.
Is there a period where you sit down, where your customers are sitting down with their devs and saying, "Hey, we're going to put this thing in," just so it's not a shock to them, like when they try and open a PR or merge code or something like that, and they get all these new errors they haven't seen before, right?
Yeah. And again, I think that gets back to collaboration and kind of breaking down those silos. So, more mature customers of ours have, found ways to break down those silos a bit. I think there's a bit more work to do there for sure. I would, certainly getting the development teams involved early, we've seen is a good best practice for success. I think it's a lot easier for, development teams to be involved in deciding on tools early on, like so infrastructure as code security tools, getting them used to those tools, getting them to try tools, getting them to play with tools to see how they function within their workflows and within their tool chains, I think is really important. And then getting security to come in and bless those tools that they really like is probably a lot easier, or we see that a lot easier motion than for security to go off and decide in a vacuum that, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And again, try to shove that onto developers.
Right. And I understand you have a biannual report that Lacework puts out that we've got here in the show notes.
Yep, we do. It's our Lacework Cloud Threat Report. Excuse me. I'm having a senior moment. Apologies for that.
Yeah, no problem. I am very familiar with those.
Yeah, and one of the things we found in that report relative to this is, you can expect as infrastructure as code becomes more popular, as infrastructure as code, as more and more applications sort of get built and provisioned using infrastructure as code, it's just that there's a higher probability for mistakes, right, to happen, and for those mistakes to make their way into production environments. And this latest Lacework Cloud Threat Report uncovered that, over the past 6 months, insecure configurations were found in over 70% of the environments we monitored. So there's still a long way for folks to go here. It's still, a problem that needs to be solved for sure.
Awesome. Good stuff. So listeners can check out the show notes and find that in there, find the links to that report. And Tony, thanks so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Yeah, Adrian, thank you so much.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk data privacy with Dan Frechtling from Boltive. Don't leave the door open. Secure your APIs with the Curity Identity Server. Curity allows you to centralize identity management policies with a solution developed by an expert team using well-established standards. Curity facilitates scalable security for apps and websites by offering a unique combination of identity and access management with API security. Protect your users, secure apps and websites, manage API access. Start your free trial today at securityweekly.com/curity. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. That's how both our guests today got onto the show, I believe, is starting with that form. All right, for our second interview today, Dan Frechtling joins us today to talk about why data privacy is getting overhauled in 2023. Dan is the CEO of Boltive, which makes a product that helps publishers and ad exchanges address invasive and potentially malicious ads. I hope I'm characterizing that correctly.
Yeah, that's right, Adrian. Thanks for that intro.
Right. Dan's been leading B2B SaaS businesses since before the dot-com bubble and was a VP at Stamps.com at one point. I found that an interesting tidbit there. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And thanks for giving me a trip down memory lane just now.
Yeah, that one jumped out at me. Stamps.com. There's got to be a story there from like .com startups to the U.S. Post Office. It's the U.S. Post Office, right?
Yeah, at one point, Stamps.com was a punchline, and then it became wildly successful after I had left. But the thing that changed actually for the company was 9/11 and the anthrax in the mail. And once there was a rebranding of many companies to national security companies, Stamps got swept up in that. Stamps.com did, because they were able to trace mail, and it was a very effective defense against more pathogens, but through the mail system using the unique tracking that was on the Stamps.com printable postage.
Very cool. I did not know that at all. That's very interesting. So talking about privacy today, I guess to get us started, you know, what we just talked about, you had a role at Stamps.com. So how do you get to privacy? How do you get over to because you haven't always been in the security world, correct?
Yeah, I haven't been. I sold my last company called G2 to Verisk, and that was kind of adjacent to cybersecurity. That was about bad actors and bad content, illegal e-commerce. But it was really a personal situation. I didn't intend to become a privacy practitioner. I don't have a legal background, but I had an incident that happened to me that really compelled me to do something about privacy. And what happened was, one day my wife had back pain. And so we searched to figure out what the causes might be. And after no improvement, we went in for an MRI, and we got a very strange diagnosis that it was possible cancer. And that's about the last thing you would have expected. We certainly didn't expect it. And we did more and more tests, and it was confirmed it was non-small cell lung cancer. But it was also very advanced, unfortunately, at stage 4, having spread throughout her body. So I did tons of research, like many people do when you go through the cancer journey, and visited lots of treatment sites, looked for lots of different variations of cancer that it might be. But while I was researching the diagnosis, I was being profiled online, not to my knowledge, based on my browse history. And I started seeing all these shady cancer treatments coming through the internet. And some were new treatments, some were dramatic. But it was really how I learned, having been a marketer such as my time at stamps.com, I learned the other side and how intrusive and predatory targeted marketing can really be. So having gone through that experience, and one of life's ironies, the founding CEO of Boltive was also going through that same journey with his wife. And my wife sadly passed away, but his Val was still with us, and so he did a very noble thing, and he took time to be a caregiver, and that allowed me to come into the company. He recruited me in to be CEO, and we transitioned at that point. And it's been a real good fit for me because we really are a mission-based business, and privacy is more than just another offshoot of cybersecurity. For many of us, it's a very personal mission about data rights for people and taking back some of those rights that were lost.
Yeah, and it's in security. I think you do. Well, I'm biased, right? I've been in security my whole career, but you do find a lot of mission-oriented folks, where it's more than just a job. Not necessarily with a story like yours, but generally it's touched them in some way personally. Where they just they dove in, they did a bunch of research, and before you know it, it ends up where you live. Because you want to make things better, right?
Yeah, that's really it.
Yeah. So, let's kind of, so since you mentioned Boltive, let's talk a little bit about what Boltive does, because this is not really my area either. There are a lot of categories that are kind of adjacent to security, like anti-fraud, dealing with bots and things like that. But to me, kind of the ad tech industry and how a lot of marketing works behind the scenes, how, I think we've all seen the effects of searching for something online and all of a sudden getting targeted ads related to your browsing habits. And in fact, we even have a story we're going to cover in the news segment today about how Apple, kind of took advantage of people's privacy when they shouldn't have. There's a lawsuit against them for that. But I guess maybe help us understand like what the problem is here. How this I guess a problem in the market that Boltive kind of serves to address.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that what I describe here, I think will lend itself to the Apple story too in a moment. But it comes down to programmatic advertising. So programmatic advertising is an auction called real-time bidding. And that auction takes place in something like 20 to 50 milliseconds. And while that's happening, it's all algorithmically based, no human intervention. There are buyers and sellers that are matched up. And it's essentially lawless. It's like putting a package in the mail when you are buying an ad and passing through a number of different intermediaries along the way until that package is then opened up on a website and served to a consumer. But the handoffs along the way from the middlemen, they're essentially handling something they don't really know what the material is. So as a result of that, there's a need for a sheriff to help make sure that bad things aren't happening. And that's how Boltive started. Our original name is Ad Lightning, and that's still the name of our anti-malvertising product, which does address malware issues like redirects and malicious browser extensions and Trojans and other things that are delivered through ads. But as we've grown over time, our customers have asked for other solutions. So they've asked for solutions against objectionable ads. We're just exiting the political season, and there's quite a bit of extreme content that makes its way into political campaigns, more so in recent years. And that's undesirable by many online publishers. So our technology can discover malcontent. It can be images that are considered unseemly or not safe for work that we can help block as well. But this area of what I think the politicians like to call surveillance advertising is really a much bigger issue and a much more timely issue. And that's being driven by this year, really, regulations that are being finalized that are coming online next year starting January 1. And I think you did a very good job back in August with Scott Giordano of Sperian when you talked about the new data privacy laws. That's an excellent episode, and I think it's still worth going back and listening to because there's still a lot of good wisdom in there. But we're here, Boltive is here to help companies because many were scrambling then, back in August. Even more started scrambling after the Sephora announcement, or Sephora settlement, I should say, and more are scrambling now. But I'll make one more comment on Apple. Apple's done a very savvy thing, which is they've built a very privacy-safe walled garden around their devices. And what it does is it takes advantage of how the laws are written. So the laws are written really to discourage data sharing between companies, third parties, cross-context. Those are some of the terms used. But Apple, being as large and pervasive as it is, can do those ad buying and ad serving and targeting all within a single enterprise. So while the exact same thing is happening, it's not leaving the walls and therefore is lawful. Very clever, very savvy, privacy supportive, but also very lucrative too.
Sure.
Is that why we're seeing with the American Data Privacy Protection Act proposal, the big tech companies not making more noise about it for the reason you just mentioned?
Yeah, there is an outcome where privacy regulations like the ADPPA make the big tech companies more powerful because they essentially sidestep the provisions that affect the smaller players in the ecosystem that are forced to share in order to be viable advertising channels. Whereas the big players, the big tech, will win because they can be privacy compliant and they have massive amounts of inventory. When you look at what Google and what Meta and what TikTok has, Amazon has, they're in Apple, of course, they're the players that will get stronger if privacy regulations don't take that into account.
Why isn't this talked about more? The U.S. definitely falls behind other countries on privacy. Why do you think there is such reluctance to? Well, I think I know the answer. It's one word: consumerism, but or capitalism. But why do you think there's such acceptance on the part of the consumer to accept privacy violations? So just a couple of hours ago, I accidentally clicked on an ad. I have a hurt finger and my clicking finger is not working very well, and I accidentally clicked on an ad. Within seconds, I received an ad to my email with a promotional discount to a company that I never meant to even interact with, which felt like a huge privacy violation. I was furious. There's nothing I can do about it. Horse is out of the barn. I can write to my Congress people, I can do all I want, but I'm not a big voice here. And there aren't a lot of people like me. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think you said it, sort of unfettered capitalism and sort of getting used to a world over time, like the water being turned up, boiling a frog. But it does reach a breaking point. I think if you go back in history, it's very interesting to watch the confluence of two trends. One is the origin of the kind of tracking that you mentioned and being profiled and served ads. And the other is the origin of data protection. And when the internet started, it was a frontier that was lawless. I mean, it was accepted in, I remember from the beginning of the era that Adrian fondly caused me to remember at stamps.com, that it was accepted that much of the internet was outside the jurisdiction of law. Things just happened. It was a Wild West. And so you had the origin of the cookie, which, if you go back in the beginning of the internet, people used to browse cars by going to auto pages on Yahoo and MSN and AOL, some of those names, and car makers placed their ads there. Then one day Google appears, and now people are searching for content, and the audience fragments. And advertisers then have to work with all these intermediaries to reach that audience that used to be centralized on the big portals. And the origin of the cookie was you could know who had visited sites, not at that moment, but who had visited those sites before. And back to the unfettered capitalism, that's a holy grail. That's massively valuable to be able to know people that are auto intenders because they had visited certain sites in the past 30 days. And so, and that over time just became more and more like the water, being turned up on the stove. It became more and more pervasive. You had interest-based advertising. And then in 2007, which was really iPhone dawn of the multi-device era, you have cross-app advertising, which is like the mobile equivalent of the retargeting that we used to see just on the web. And then over time, you had device graphs that could connect your phone, your desktop, even later your connected TV, and know that you're the same person, and even cross-device hit you up with those ads. So that's kind of the progression of online tracking. Then at the same time, we had this other thing going on, mostly outside the US, which was around, it was sort of the drumbeat of data protection. It began, I think, in Europe. Europe has a history, of course, of data privacy violations that have had horrendous consequences. But UK newspapers were engaged in this hacking scandal back in the early 2000s, where people's information were published in Rupert Murdoch's newspapers. We didn't start to see this in the US really until Edward Snowden and the leaking of NSA classified information. Then we started to wake up, but again, not as far along as the rest of the world. And it wasn't until Equifax and Cambridge Analytica and these other things grew that the first US privacy law, which was a CCPA out of California, was passed in 2018. But more importantly, you had GDPR in Europe, which was this great collision where GDPR said enough is enough, that the data tracking has gone too far. We need more data protection. And since it's been a whole different world, if you think of the eras of the internet, it's been a different era post 2018.
Yeah. So let's see. Trying to think of where to pick up here. So, going back to kind of the foundation here, I want to get an idea for, you're talking about how these ads get auctioned, and it's all fully automated. Like I've got to imagine that different websites or the mechanism that's used to do the platforms that are used to do the auctioning, the ad tech companies, there's got to be some kind of content or policy. Well, I say there's got to be, right? Like I know I might be disappointed by your answer here, but what is the current state of the market? Is it still very much Wild West, where somebody has like a EULA or something like that, says, the ads can't fit into any of these categories, and people just ignore it and all kinds of stuff gets blasted out? Or, where is the industry in terms of companies having something like your product? Or like, I would think that the ad techs, like these auctioning platforms, would have this built in.
This is an ecosystem that resists contracts. And it's very much how can you get dozens and dozens of intermediaries to work together and solve a very, very difficult problem, which is, if I'm an advertiser and I want to advertise on the internet, where should I go and who should I reach and how often should I run these? It's a very, very hard problem to solve. And so the notion of terms of service or EULAs to say, let's solve this problem, but please don't send me these kinds of ads and these kinds of ads and those kinds of ads. Those can be done with direct buys, but with programmatic, there's just not really a control mechanism for that. It's all happening so fast, and there's so many buyers and sellers and so much volume going through. So what you see in the California laws, though, are the encouraging of contracts and the notion of defining service providers, contractors, and third parties. And those are three types of vendors that have very, very different legal implications in California. But you must have contracts with those three parties in order to do business with them. And that's to solve the data protection problem, not the content problem. The content problem, I believe, would need to be solved similar to like a Digital Services Act, like in Europe, coming to the US, which would be repealing Section 230, right? In the Section 230 in the Communications Code basically says, as a platform, you're hands off with regard to user-generated abhorrent content. That's not your fault. But that's the sort of, again, I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers listening on this episode may have more to say. But that framework, again, the sort of consumers' willingness up until recently to allow privacy violations, and the legal framework of competition before consumer protection in a lot of the way the laws are written, it means that you're in this lawless world, Adrian, and EULAs in terms of service will do their best, but the technology moves faster than that.
Wow. Yeah, and mentioning lawyers talking about this, you referenced the episode we had with Scott Giordano. For folks listening or watching, that is episode 285. If you look for episode 285 or just search Scott Giordano's name on YouTube, you'll find that episode where he talks about these 5 new laws going in. And the one of those that we're going to touch on today is California's law, because as we all know, California tends to be ahead of the curve here, and they're a large enough state with enough people and companies headquartered in California that they can have a really big impact, almost the same level impact as like a federal statute in some cases. But I believe this is called, so when Scott was on, you'll hear him refer to it as CPRA. But I've come to learn from Dan that what we're talking about today is CCPA, which is like a patch for CPRA, because CPRA didn't work. Is that about right?
Actually, it's close. Yeah, we are talking about CCPA, and CPRA is actually the patch. But I got it. But there's no right answer, right? There's a school of thought that said, let's just call the whole thing CPRA now, because that's the new ballot initiative that was passed in California. And then there's another group that's maybe more purist that says, well, no, it's really amending CCPA, so we're going to keep calling it CCPA. But that's the thing, and the rulemaking is still ongoing with that. The law takes effect January 1, and enforcement takes effect July 1. So it's not a whole lot of time for companies to get ready.
So what you mentioned Sephora. So what happened with Sephora here? If enforcement hasn't happened yet, what are they getting hit with here, and why?
Yeah. Enforcement of the CPRA takes effect January 1. Enforcement of CCPA has been ongoing for years now. What was different about Sephora was it was the first settlement where a fine was paid. And there were hundreds of letters that the Attorney General's office sent out, letters of noncompliance. And companies would make corrections within a 30-day statutory cure period. They had 30 days to fix their act. Almost all companies did that, and so avoided more severe consequences. Well, 2 things. 1, Sephora didn't, allegedly. And number 2, that 30-day cure goes away January 1, so there isn't a warning shot anymore. But let's talk about what happened with Sephora that was claimed. And I'll say that this was in the context soon before the elections, and the Attorney General's office is an elected office. And the words around this were very serious by Attorney General Bonta. The gloves are coming off, and they're getting very serious in the Attorney General's office of California about companies that are skirting the law. But what happened was it ended up being a settlement for $1.2 million for violations of CCPA, and which makes it the first fine. It's not a very large fine in the scheme of things, but recall the first GDPR fine was around $250,000, and it reached a peak of $800 million to Amazon last year. But what was at stake here for Sephora was the Attorney General alleged that Sephora did not honor opt-outs from a certain form of signal called the global privacy control, which is like the latter-day version of Do Not Track on your browser. It's a browser plugin or inherent to certain browsers that tells the world, do not track me. And Sephora, like many companies, in fact, like 90% of companies, don't have a way to honor that signal. What else happened was data was shared with third parties through an online analytics vendor, and that was not named, but some have suggested it might have been Google Analytics. And that was allowing consumer data to leave Sephora and be shared with a third party without Sephora disclosing that it was sharing or really selling that data in their privacy policies. Those were the issues.
That's interesting. Was it intentional or oops, it leaked? Hopefully you get in trouble either way. Again, to reference another story we're going to talk about in the news, there was an attempt to call some cryptocurrency going missing a hack, where everybody looking at it's like, nah, they're just they're trying to get funds out of the reach of regulators.
It's not a field I have that much experience in, but I would feel like the odds of accidentally sharing that type of data is actually much higher than the odds of accidentally sending cryptocurrency into the void. I've seen it in the past. People do end up using something like Google Analytics in places where no one thinks about it. It gets inserted, and then 3 years later, you've got so much data in there that you didn't even know about. So, do you think it's likely that a lot of these are accidental, just because people don't really know,
Yes.
and then the data piles up? And
You described it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better myself. That is exactly what happens. That it's no ill intent. I mean, Sephora just wanted to find more customers, and they were trying to find lookalike audiences. It was not malicious. It's actually good business, but it's still a violation. And it's a mistake that many companies, most companies that are marketing today are making the exact same mistake. So it's not ill intent. And what you described, the reason I chuckled is that this is often how it happens. You have a project and someone puts a pixel or a beacon on a web page, and there's no governance around that. And this might have been last summer with an intern. It might have been 5 years ago, but it's still sitting there. And now the laws have changed, and now you can't do that anymore. So it's, with a lot of data privacy, the first thing you've got to do is your data mapping. And people think about databases and where is my data stored and what kind of structured and unstructured data do I have in which database. But then all the while, there's this problem of these pixels and beacons and tags sitting on web pages, which are seemingly pretty innocuous. And that's where the leaks of consumer data are going. And that's where you're getting in trouble. So Sephora, I should have mentioned, is also under a 2-year injunction where they have to report back all their privacy incidents to California and how to solve those. But it's exactly that. It's often inadvertent. It could have been anybody. It happened to be Sephora, and it happened to be Sephora didn't remedy it in the 30 days that they were asked to.
So talk a bit about how you guys do what you do, because it was not what I was expecting. I think it's interesting how your products work, how you find these kinds of leaks.
Yeah, because of our origin in anti-malware, we have created and patented a way of looking at bad activity that's different than most. And we called it, in this case, secret shoppers for privacy. So we create synthetic users, and it's simulated data. So whenever something wrongly happens to these, there's no laws being broken. It's imitation. But it allows us to smoke test the internet pipes in a very effective way. Like a smoke test, you would push smoke through a pipe before you would push a flammable gas. But that smoke tells you exactly where the leaks are, and you know how to repair it. So then when the gas goes through, you're safe. Same idea. We will apply these personas, and they will visit sites. They will go through the customer journey. They will visit things. They will browse things. They will put things in their shopping cart. They will opt out of data sharing. Some will opt into data sharing. And we record all the forensics of everything that's happening to these synthetic users so that we can know if systems are working properly. And it persists over time. So these users will have a lifetime. And so days, weeks, even months after they've taken on activities, we can watch, is that data leaking still? Are ads being served that shouldn't be served because the consumer opted out? And again, timestamp all of this and have a trail of everything that's happening. So it's the sort of thing that you could do with analysts, but it would be extraordinarily expensive and time consuming. And because we can create any number of these personas, they can operate at different speeds, we can get results faster. But that's really the notion.
Yeah, it's funny. You're talking about the smoke test and using made up data, using synthetic data. And immediately where my brain went was, maybe that's what Todd Davis, the CEO of LifeLock, should have done instead of using his own social security number in all those advertisements back in the day. I don't know if anybody here remembers that, but.
Oh yeah, I absolutely do. But I thought what you were going to bring up is this is actually similar to some of the like honeypot techniques, right? Like things like canary tokens and honey
Yes.
users and all of that, but brought to the advertising environment, which
Right.
it's a more long-term thing, right? Like you can't just do things over a short period of time. You said you watch things over a month. And how much of your engineering is focused on like generating that believable user activity and then track it? How do you detect that something is leaked? Do you deal with data brokers and try to see if you can buy these things, or how does that work?
We will observe how the data is leaking because of the marketing that's directed towards the personas. And we will have test and control personas of different stripes. We'll have the opt-in, we'll have the opt-out. and then we have a third, control. So we can see, for someone who never engaged with a certain brand, what is their ad experience? Because sometimes you'll see ads from companies you've never visited because of generalized contextual advertising. But we can statistically determine the likelihood when an opt-out consumer sees a certain number of ads in a certain period of time, how likely is it that data is leaking to them? We can also observe communications from the browser also. So that allows us to see which parties are engaged. And this is through the benefit of some standards, some internet standards like the TCF, Transparency and Consent Framework, and the US privacy string, and different strings in Europe. But there are these other standards out there that allow us to kind of more quickly see when consent is dropped.
That's awesome. So it's a scientific version of feeling weird about suddenly seeing a bunch of ads for shoes when you were just doing something on a website, but then you never know, is that a coincidence? But if you do it at scale and often enough, you can prove that it is not a coincidence. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and at least it calls to suspicion. And because we can see the nodes where it happened, you can investigate and find where sometimes, we have examples of patches that were put and deployed out on different internet intermediaries, and those patches undid the privacy compliance unknowingly because it wasn't part of the regression testing. Those kinds of things happen all the time. Again, innocuous, but you wouldn't see it unless you had the ability at scale to see lots of user experiences.
And
so
where do you run the infrastructure for that? I guess in some cases, do you need to be coming out from like IP addresses that are realistic? Do you have to use like residential IPs, or are you doing all this from a cloud? Or
it's both. Yeah, we do cloud, residential, different situations for different needs. But you're right, because the theme is you have to look and act as much as a real consumer would. And anything short of that, and you can be blocked, and the interactions won't happen, and you won't get a read on what's really going on.
So let me get this right. Like, because the ad tech companies aren't blocking malicious stuff, you have to be like there's. It sounds almost like they're spending more time on blocking you from blocking the bad stuff than actually blocking the bad stuff in the first place, which is what they should have been doing in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's, if you're running a retail business and you have had price scrapers hitting your site thousands and thousands of times a day, that's maybe your first pain before you think about privacy. Is what about my own data as a business? I don't want that going out there so competitors can undercut my prices, and the price bots that are out there. So the business need steered companies towards let's avoid those scrapers from hitting our sites. Let's optimize for that. Now privacy comes along, and it's less dollars and cents, although we see ROI every day on this problem. It's a little bit more nuanced. What's very interesting about privacy and consent is it's not just a compliance problem. It's really a targeting problem. And what we discover with our systems when there are errors like this, what we call dark signals, that is when an opt-out consumer actually looks like they've opted in, or when an opt-in consumer looks like they've actually opted out, which is actually a more frequent problem. That's not just a compliance issue. That's a revenue issue. Opt-in consumers who raise their hands and say, go ahead and target me, those are your most lucrative prospects. And when you can't see who they are because of the technical handoffs and errors and disruptions that we see all the time, then as a publisher, you're leaving revenue on the table. As an advertiser, you're missing your most responsive audience. So I go back and this problem that we're solving, it gets wrapped up in privacy, but it's really at its core, it's a targeting blindness that leads to this in the first place.
Right. Any other questions, Katie?
I just had one. It's a little tangential, but in terms of privacy and privacy management, there are some companies who are getting pretty serious about it. And with some of the laws that are in place, some of the ones that will hopefully be coming up, it necessitates that companies have processes and tools to be able to know where all of their data related to a data subject are. And that's super problematic. So how do you work, or do you work now, or what are your plans to work with companies like, the data mapping, data identification, like the OneTrusts of the world, if you're familiar with them. The companies that can go out and find, if I'm Katie Teitler and I work with company A and company A has 762 repositories with my data in it, they don't know where all of that data is, and it would take weeks or even months to find it. So how do you work with those companies, or what is your stance on that?
Yeah, that's a different thing than we do. So we partner with companies that are really good at data mapping, really good at inventorying the data, really good at mapping and tracking data flows, and then governing those data flows. There's a lot of great technology that's been built. OneTrust is one, but there's many others that are very competitive and have innovations that OneTrust doesn't have. And those are our potential partners. They figure out the data sprawl problem, and we figure out the diagnosis and the validation. So the diagnosis being, let's run our scans and let's see where the synthetic personas are finding problems and pinpoint where those are. Then these other technologies that you're describing, let's remedy those, and then let's validate everything's been fixed by running it again. The thing to remember, though, is vendors are changing all the time, and errors are being introduced, sometimes on a day-to-day basis. So it's not enough to audit once a year. That will get you in trouble with the regulators. The auditing really needs to be ongoing, but that's our role, more the monitoring and auditing, which is a naturally, like, you don't want the fox guarding the hen house. It's natural to have a different company do the discovery and the auditing than it is to have the company that's actually performing the service. So it's kind of a natural break in there and a good partnership.
Yeah, it sounds like it. A few years ago I learned about them, and I was a big fan of that technology. So it's great that you have that natural partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Dan, what do companies need to do to prepare? Well, obviously with Sephora, they're past the deadline for some of the stuff that they need to do. But I guess, two-part question. Where do you see the most gaps in what companies haven't done yet? It sounds like that, some of the data requests, some of the, the right to be forgotten type stuff, having these processes and procedures in place might be part of it. And what should companies be doing? Like, I assume there's services, there's companies you can hire to come in and do like a gap analysis on what you need to do to comply with this stuff. But what should companies be doing between now and January 1st or just now?
Yeah, I think it starts something. If you look back and rewind the clock to May of 2018 when GDPR took effect, European companies weren't fully ready for that. And that's okay. The regulators didn't expect perfection, but they expected good faith efforts and a start. I don't think we're at a point where we can run a report card on most companies and see how mature they are, because so few companies have buttoned up the way they need to. And that's okay. There's going to be some forgiveness. But number one, you have to assign a leader for your data privacy program in one way or another. Under GDPR, you need to have a data protection officer. That's not required under California. Yeah, right, exactly. Not required under the national law, the ADPPA, but it's a good idea. And then engaging in the data mapping, right? There's a good NIST privacy framework around how to do data mapping through inventory and data flow. Lots of companies that can do that. That's a next step. Then I would say implementing systems to prevent what we call dark signals and data skimmers. So dark signals are when these transmissions of consent and data between handoffs between vendors break, are mistranslated, and data leaks out. Those dark signals are a menace. The second thing is data skimmers. We didn't get much of a chance to talk about this, but the problem with this data leakage it's not just that the big technology companies are going to see it. There's actually some bad actors lurking in there. We see malware distributors in the bid stream that are profiling consumers and taking that consumer data. We have even seen companies that are sanctioned companies in unfriendly foreign countries that are getting U.S. consumer data, because this is a really massive ecosystem. And you're not talking just about third parties, but fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh parties, the vendors of vendors of vendors that are out there. So identifying who those data skimmers are is a very, very important step, because that's where it becomes dangerous. So I would think the first thing is to do something, assign someone, begin the data mapping process, and then where Boltive comes in are these systems for the transmissions between vendors to make sure that's operating properly and that there are no holes or data leakage there.
Guillaume had the perfect wrap question for you. Yeah, go ahead, Guillaume.
Just a quick question. Do you run an ad blocker? And if so, which one is your favorite?
We don't. We partner with ad blockers. Or I should say, we are open to partnering with ad blockers, because that ad blockers can do a good thing for consumers, but they can do a bad thing for publishers. A lot of the advertising we're describing here is what funds the open web. And without the advertising and even some of the overreach and infractions that we're talking about, without this money being available and being funded by advertisers, many of the websites we love would disappear behind paywalls. Right.
Yeah.
So ad blockers have a role, and ad blockers have a role. They're all trying to do the right thing in different ways. But I guess I would leave that one point, is that if we go too far, if the pendulum swings too far, we're going to end up in a world like where the internet began, which is you have CompuServe and AOL and these walled gardens that control everything, because there's not enough money for the smaller players to survive, because the ad dollars disappear due to privacy excessiveness.
Yeah, too much regulation as well.
Yeah.
How do you personally handle the, that dilemma? Do you so you don't use blockers for anything or anything like Brave?
I do. I do think that there's room for privacy safe browsers like Brave, Ghost Dawn. Firefox is good at this. If you're not on any of those, deleting your unused browser extensions, I think is a good idea. It's using search engines like DuckDuckGo that don't track you, using all the switching on all of the protections on your mobile device, iOS, turning off app tracking and so forth, using anonymized email. I mean, you can go on and on and on. I will tell you personally, I don't turn too much of it off because I'm curious what kind of targeted advertising I'm going to get. I kind of need to know that. So I'm out there like the average consumer.
And no, that's a really good answer. And to be honest, I don't know how they do things different, but Facebook and Instagram, so Facebook's products have the best targeted ads. Like they really do know me, and they pitch me stuff, and like I'll publicly give them kudos. Like I've bought several products. In fact, those are the only products I can think of where I've actually bought stuff from ads, directly from ads. Most of the other ones that I interact with get it wrong. I think we talked about this in the prep call. Like I'll often get ads for things that I just bought, and it's the kind of thing where you're only going to buy, one at least for a given amount of time, like an appliance or a car or something like that.
You don't collect battery chargers?
Right. like you're wasting all your money. I mean, yes, I looked at this thing, but there should be some way for the advertiser to know that I pulled the trigger on it and I actually bought it. So there's no sense in advertising to me what I just got.
Happens all the time.
It kills me. It kills me. It just seems. Well, and to your point, I do like to see that. I like to see, okay, ad tech for all the AI and ML and talk that they have, it's still it looks pretty dumb. It's just kind of shotgun blasted, right?
It is. Yeah, it is entertaining.
Yeah. Well, Dan, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. Great conversation. I loved it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adrian. And if you want to find out more about us, we're at boltive.com.
Oh, yeah. And I should mention in the show notes, you generously provided a bunch of links if people want to read more about this, whether you want to read about the legal side, the privacy laws, or more about data leakage and things like that. A lot of great, one from Consumer Reports, a lot of great resources here in the show notes.
Yeah, and if you want to talk shop, anybody, I love to geek out on this stuff. Hit me up on LinkedIn also. There's a thriving privacy community on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And we'll be back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. When it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest threats are the ones you never see coming. SecureWorks detects and responds to cyber attackers' ever-changing tactics. We come armed with Taegis, a security analytics platform designed to recognize attacks and stop them before they do harm. SecureWorks, defending every corner of cyberspace. Learn more at securityweekly.com/SecureWorks. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. You can now find us on Instagram. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more at Sec Weekly. And I think we're also on Mastodon now. Same thing, Sec Weekly, SECWEEKLY. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW297 because this is episode 297. If you want to follow along and check out the notes. We are making up for a week. We skipped a week last week to do a double-length panel on getting some CISO feedback on the Joe Sullivan case. So we got a lot of funding items this week. We've got 18 fundings, 2 acquisitions, bunch of layoffs. So it looks like more than it is. Like, we're not going to talk about all of these individually. Some of these we'll talk about collectively, but yeah, let's jump into it. Guillaume, I think there was a funding that personally hits home for you. If you want to chat about that one.
Yeah, Boost Security, boostsecurity.io just came out of stealth mode with a $12 million round of funding, and they're a local to me company in Montreal. So it's always cool when we have cool security startups, and they're helping companies secure their supply chain, and they've posted some really interesting blog posts this week, so you can check out the website boostsecurity.io. Some really in-depth threat modeling of how things can go wrong when you have code on GitHub specifically, threat modeling the entire thing with attack trees and everything. So some really, really nerdy blog posts, not just some marketing fluff. So highly recommend checking that out.
What do they do?
They do. It's essentially a system that lets you set rules in your CI/CD, right? So it does let you orchestrate a lot of different scanners and create some really advanced rules. They use Rego for creating rules, right? So you can define like how a GitHub repository should be secured, but then you can also define very granularly what do you do when a vulnerability is detected in code, right? Like, do you block? Do you not block? And then you can orchestrate all these different tools together. So it lets you create something that's going to be really powerful without being necessarily blocking to developers, right? Like, so you apply the right level of security when it really matters, as opposed to a lot of the solutions that are more like on-off. You turn that on for the entire repo or specific file types, and then you have like limited ways of notifying. So it's super flexible. I've tried it out, and I'm loving what I'm seeing. It's super simple to set up. Right, you connect it to GitHub, set up some GitHub actions, and there you go. You have all the data from things like Dependabot, SAS scanning, all these different tools together in the same interface, and then you can start sending these notifications to your devs via different mechanisms. The one I prefer is when they submit a PR, right? Like, you block that or not block it, but inform them. So, very flexible package and cool Montreal company.
Very cool. Bishop Fox is in the news again. They've extended their Series B funding to $129 million. I think 46 of that is new funding. It's a trend we've seen a lot. Instead of raising entirely new rounds, they just extend the existing cap table. It's going to be dangerous if I get into trying to use these terms without Mr. Shields here to correct me. But yeah, it's an interesting case. We've seen a few cases of this where a well-established company, Bishop Fox being primarily a consulting company, they do pen tests, security assessments, PCI assessments, stuff like that. Traditional consulting company building a product and raising money to build that product internally. So they built this. It's not exactly external attack surface management. It's external attack surface management mixed with consulting, basically. So their product Cosmos will go out just like any other attack surface management product and find gaps and issues and things like that. That your traditional external vulnerability scanners might miss. Because you don't exactly know all the right input to put into them. There's a lot of assets scanned by attack surface management products, that like subdomain takeovers, stuff like that, a scanner you point at an IP address would not necessarily find. And when those findings come through, where they throw in their services special sauce here is, that they'll do all the prioritization for you. They'll look into them. They'll actually do mini pen tests on individual findings that come up, so that basically saving you that work. Obviously, it's going to cost you more because services are mixed in with the automated product here, than an attack surface management product that where everything's on you to go through the false positives, do the validation and stuff like that. But still, a very interesting model. I think especially in organizations where you don't want to hire a full-time attack surface management person to just go through all those results. Very interesting that they're still raising money for this and still growing it.
Yeah, and extending a previous round with the current market conditions is probably a great idea. So looking forward to see where that goes.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that. Apiro announced a $100 million Series B. I think. So it's interesting. I chatted with them. I was at LasCon. I did a keynote at LasCon in Austin, Texas, and Apiro was there. They were one of the sponsors of that conference, and they had a booth there. And I was chatting with them, because it was Palo Alto's, both Palo Alto and CrowdStrike have been trying to do acquisitions, and just it seems like in this market nobody can agree on valuation because the valuations have changed so much. Like in the public market, we saw as much as like an 80% dip in market cap and valuation, for like SaaS companies, which isn't direct line to security valuations, but certainly, I think people are expecting to get big discounts on what the valuations used to be. I think I did some math and said, if everybody got a 70% valuation discount, we would go from having like 55 unicorns in security to 3. Like it's that big of a difference. So Apiro was one of those. Long story short, Palo Alto, the rumors were they were trying to buy Apiro. Apiro said nope, when they couldn't decide on an amount and decided to raise instead. And yeah, this is another shift left product, AppSec, developer facing product here. I believe Apiro. I don't know too much about it.
Yeah, it's it's focused on application security and securing the CI/CD pipeline. It's a little bit more than that, and they go into it a little in more depth in the article. But it's definitely one of those. Let's find the vulnerabilities and contextualize them before we get everything into prod. So I have heard of them before. This is a big round for what's been out there in the last month or two. So kudos to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, $100 million Series B. That's a serious round there. Yeah, that's a very
serious round, and it's an actual round, just like we were talking about. This isn't just an extension. So
exactly. Yeah. The next one puzzles me a bit. $70 million round for a Web3 protection company. A company that's trying to help stop crypto-related fraud. Like, this just seems, so first of all, it seems like a tough market to be in, because once crypto's gone, it's gone. Like that's how the blockchain is designed. Like there is no recovery in most cases, unless, we've seen the US government recover some stuff, but they can pull legal strings that private companies and individuals just can't pull. I don't know. And with the market downturn, I guess it's kind of surprising. At the same time, like, I guess if you're still in business, if you haven't gone out of business after all the hijinks that have gone on, you should be concerned about fraud in crypto, right?
I wish I remembered who posted that, but I saw a tweet in the last 2 days. Someone said, I just started a new startup that detects if something related to crypto is fraud. We say it's AI, but it just always says yes.
Yeah. The code for that is very simple. It's 3 lines of code.
Yeah. But that being said, who knows like how long ago they started working on that round, and if it would have happened if they started this week, right?
Yeah, this is a 4-year-old company at this point. 3.5, 4-year-old company. So they've been around for a while already.
And they have forensics as well as transaction monitoring, and I think like the forensic space, there's definitely a lot of action there. Try to see, who's stealing those hacked funds, air quote, hacked or not, we don't know. Who's using them, who's parking them for 6 years, and then trying to move them somewhere and getting arrested. So I think the forensics part of it is going to remain a pretty big deal as long as cryptocurrency is used. And I don't think it's going to stop being used, right? Otherwise, how are we going to pay for ransomware?
We can't put ransom extortion companies out of business now. But yeah, it's I think almost every one of these we've seen raising funds does both the prevention and the recovery side of things. And it makes sense, right? Like if you're going to engage with a company to prevent fraud, there's a good chance you're going to need them to run investigations and stuff like that when you fail to prevent it, right? And kind of, what boggles my mind here is like a lot of the issues we're seeing with fraud are, almost business architecture, like legal structuring of the business. If you look at a lot of these crypto exchanges, none of them are based in the U.S. I don't know if we're going to talk about FTX, but they were based in the Bahamas. So I don't know. Like, you can't build a fraud prevention product when the CEO of the crypto exchange is the source of the fraud. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. Island was interesting. So story number 5, interesting to see Island extending their Series B. Already the rounds that we've seen from the enterprise browsers here. I'd be kind of interested in your take, Guillaume, on some of the enterprise browsers here. I don't know if you looked at Talon or Island. I want to have briefings with these companies because it's one of those things where like the amount of money going into them, like they already have over $1 billion valuations. They're already unicorns, and they've been out of stealth for like less than a year. And to me, it looks like a niche product at best. It looks like another Bromium to me, where I can see some niche use cases, but Chrome is going to be good enough for most companies. So I have a hard time seeing these guys conquer the good enough of Chrome to actually sell a browser to enterprises. Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned Chromium, because I was looking at the article and the numbers, and that was exactly the company I thought of. But I think any like enterprise that has software like DLP on the endpoints, laptops that are used to access a lot of customer data, things that can't be automated on the server side and kept away from end user computing devices, we'll probably be interested in having like a safer, more controlled, like it's not security, like, oh, Chrome has more bugs than this. I think it's more how much you can control it. And I think there's definitely going to be some interest there. I know it would have solved some problems I had in the past, right? Like I had to deploy like VDI environments with browsers that could reach something that could not be reached from anywhere else, because we wanted to be able to control what would happen in that browser. So I've done things in the past that could have been solved by this. So that's why I think it might work out for some of them, but I don't see a future where there's like 5 of them. And also, I think it's not unlikely that someone like Microsoft could, get in the game and have like a version of Edge that's going to do some similar things.
So how do you buy this? Do you buy enough licenses for contractors for like specific insider threat type use cases, and then like what price point makes sense? Like $10, $30 an endpoint for this per month?
Yeah, I have no idea on the pricing, but for companies that are deploying like full blown VDI environments for contractors or for people working remotely, that's also super expensive, right? You think you're saving, it's not a $2,000 laptop, it's just a VM, but then the IO behind makes you buy a $3 million storage array. So I'm not sure, but I think maybe it's going to be like enterprise customers willing to pay pretty significant amount, and they're not going to have 15,000 customers. We'll see.
Yeah, so that might be the piece that I'm missing here is I don't realize how common it is, perhaps for companies to be using VDI to solve the same problem. Yeah, so if that's
I can tell you in banking, that's definitely something. Banking investment companies, it's something that's there's so much regulation around monitoring what happens. There's so many apps that are kind of legacy and integrations with third parties that are done over the web, and it's kind of a mess. And I feel like when you have a solution that helps an existing mess be less messy by just being bolt on, for better or for worse, it sells more easily. But that's why 40 years later you have 62 security products instead of something that was engineered to be secured from the ground up. But as far as convincing people they need to buy it, I think it'll be easier.
Yeah, interesting. So another one of the other larger rounds here, Achilles, which is kind of hard to say. Achilles. So the letter A and then the word keyless raised a $65 million round, Series B, and looks like going after kind of like the HashiCorp,
Vault.
kind of Vault kind of product aiming at DevOps folks for managing credentials and keys and things like that in your production environments. And it says reimagined, but I haven't had time to dig into the product very much. So
you haven't had time to reimagine how it could be so different. I haven't used it. Definitely, people are looking for solutions for secret management that are that work on multiple clouds and data centers. Not every company is using just AWS or just GCP and able to use the features that are built to the cloud providers. That's why HashiCorp Vault is so popular. So I don't know how this is better or different.
Katie, are you familiar with these guys at all?
I believe we took a briefing with them a few years ago, but I don't remember all that much about them specifically, unfortunately, because it has been a few years. They do have a good board of advisors. They've got some real power behind them. And this is definitely, secrets management, especially with DevOps and how things are moving there. It's an area of concern for a lot of companies. So it's not, the sexy stuff that we're talking about in other areas. Secrets management is, is pretty foundational stuff, but it's incredibly important. And I think the points that Guillaume raised are obviously spot on here, because there have to be competitors, there have to be alternatives, and there has to be something that makes it a lot more manageable for companies, because secrets management is not easy. Managing your keys at scale is not easy for companies. So, it'd be interesting to see that, they're a few years old at least. So we'll see what happens. It's not going to be, front page news or anything, because again, this is not a sexy topic in the security industry, but it's a really important foundational, I think.
I think what's going to drive the difference is if something can be easy enough to use properly, so that companies that are not, super engineering driven companies that have been using HashiCorp Vault for the last 6 years can start using that, then I think it's going to be a big win, because there's still a lot of people putting secrets in things that are not meant for storing secrets at all, right? So I think there's a pretty big market to be captured, and since people seem to like having a solution that's multi-cloud, why not have like the most user-friendly thing, even if it's not the most powerful? If you get a lot of people to use that instead of nothing, I think then that's a win for security overall.
Yeah.
So I got to give them kudos. It took me about 10 seconds after hitting the website to get to the datasheet PDF, which answered pretty much all my questions. So huge kudos for that. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to hit a company's website, not be able to get answers to simple questions like, how does your product work? What does it integrate with? That kind of stuff. But definitely looks like they're going after like HashiCorp Vault. In fact, they have API compatibility with HashiCorp Vault OSS. They make it easy to import secrets from Kubernetes Secrets, AWS Secrets Manager, Azure Key Vault, or HashiCorp Vault. And they have a password manager as well, like a human-facing password manager. So they're going after that as well. So it looks like they've got a pretty big platform product that covers a lot of ground. So, and we see the consumer side of password managers headed in the enterprise direction also. So it's going to be interesting seeing, these guys are going to be competing with 1Password and a bunch of those products in the near future, if not already, right? And they've got the SDK where you can, instead of putting secrets in scripts and things like that, you can pull it in at runtime. All right. Any of the other funding items here that leap out at either of you? Because I think I've covered the ones I want to cover, and I want to get to some of these other stories. So.
Yeah, let's move on. Lots of funding, which is good to see. But let's move on.
And international stuff as well. Like, these aren't all dollar signs here. There's some euro symbols here. There's a pound symbol. So it's always interesting to see, the security market, like Guillaume pointed out, number 12 in here is in Montreal. Some of the smaller ones here, are various places in Europe and in the UK. So it's always cool to see that as well. Watch how the market grows internationally. So Splunk acquired a company called TwinWave Security. This is not a company I'm aware of, so I'm assuming they were pretty early stage. I haven't seen Splunk do an acquisition in a while here, but looks like they're looking to kind of plug it into the Phantom SOAR stuff that they already have, and that's kind of the rationale behind the acquisition.
Well, I think there's a huge move in the market when we're talking about attack surface management and even cybersecurity asset management, where companies are looking at this wealth of data and trying to figure out what to do with it. And Splunk has always been a leader. But the innovation there hasn't, or the lack of innovation there has been problematic. But Splunk is so entrenched in so many companies that it's hard for an organization to move away from Splunk if they're a Splunk customer. But the capabilities aren't where companies need to be. If Splunk's just looking, it's just the old stuff that they have. So I think this is really smart on their part, because as painful as it is to move away from Splunk, there has been some talk in the industry about needing more from that data, needing more from that type of capability, because it's not just enough to be having that data. So I think this is really smart on their part, because there are a lot of companies coming in that are making claims of being viable competition to Splunk, and so companies are scaling back where they can. So,
and on the SOAR side, I think this is definitely like one of the use cases that pretty much everyone who gets a Phantom, or I don't know how they call it now, on the Splunk side, is let's let people submit phishing reports and analyze that and work on that. But it's never like a 5-second process like it should be. So it seems like
right.
TwinWave really focuses on that. So
not with the old SOAR tools, which is why we have a SOAR V2 market
exactly.
now. With the likes of Rapid7 has one, Insight Connect, I think. Tynes is becoming extremely popular now. All no code, like you don't have to dive into the Python or anything like that. And we've had people on the show. We've got I'm blanking on his name now, but from Brooks Running, I think, had him come on a couple times, and he had that experience of where setting up that initial proof of concept phishing enrichment SOAR workflow, he said, took him like months on a original generation SOAR platform, and then like a few hours in Rapid7. So
yeah, the old ones, I felt like it was almost never easier than just doing it on your own in Python,
right.
which is not a great value prop.
Yeah. No, because most people don't have that capability in-house.
Yeah, and it wasn't easier, so it was like, okay.
I often say products can absolutely have negative value, and you need to monitor. Like if it takes you more time and resources to do it using a commercial product than, like Guillaume just said, writing a Python script, it's time to ditch it, or find something better. And we see a lot of that
where the market is going, and they're smart to react this way, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm sure they're feeling that. I'm sure they're losing customers to some of these next generation ones. I hate that I just called them next generation, though.
It's current gen by the time you call it next gen.
So Norton LifeLock rebranded as Gen Digital. I'm not sure anybody really cares.
Well, I mean, it's the second mention of LifeLock in this podcast episode. You didn't expect that.
So they got rid of that brand. They killed the brand, which I can't blame them. LifeLock has had so many lawsuits and just crazy stuff go on. I don't blame them for wanting to ditch the brand at this point. But they merged with Avast, which Avast is already consolidated a few of the old school first gen AV companies. And now they're Gen Digital, and I think this is just the consumer stuff. I'm not sure that they have any enterprise stuff, because all the enterprise semantic stuff got split out by SDG, the PE company that acquired them. And at the same time, they laid off 15%, a quarter of their workforce. So 1,100 people. I think that's the biggest cybersecurity layoff we've seen yet. And I think all the layoffs were in Czech, on the Czech side. So mostly almost sounds like they just shut down the original Avast. But yeah, this includes everybody from Norton, Avast, LifeLock, Avira, AVG, Reputation Defender, and CC Cleaner. All that's in this makes up this Gen Digital company now. But yeah, I mean, just trying to stay alive. The OG AV companies are not having a great time of it. Other layoffs, Code 42 laid off 15% of its workforce. Richard Stinnen has a nice kind of roundup of all the cybersecurity layoffs this year so far. We've covered most of them. And just alongside, Meta, I don't know if the Amazon layoffs has happened yet, but Meta laid off 11,000. I forget how many Twitter has laid off at this point. And Amazon was rumored to be laying off 10,000 as they look to hire 150,000 people, I assume, for the warehouses to get ready for the Christmas season. But those are temporary workers.
Yeah, they're running a lot of ads for those, so it seems like heavy hiring season on the warehouse side. But yeah, these layoffs, they're definitely piling up. I think I saw some stats where, of course, by percentage, it's not the case. But if you just look at the raw numbers, there's currently been more tech layoffs in terms of people being laid off than during the original .com boom. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, these companies are so much bigger now, though, right? Like,
yeah, that's why I'm saying in percentage it doesn't mean the same thing, but it's still an impressive amount of people. So if you have any roles open or anything like that, like make sure you publicize them as much as possible, because the upside is there's going to be a lot of really good people that are available now.
Well, and that is the upside is a lot of cybersecurity companies are actively hiring. Hiring is still very difficult. So hopefully this makes it a little easier for companies that have had recs open for a long time, to finally fill those recs, because this is an industry where typically can be challenging to get people. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit easier on the hiring side. So that let's see, new products. 22 and 23 here. The only reason I mentioned Harmonic is because I know we have folks that follow us that spend a lot of time analyzing and following startups. And there's a new startup called Harmonic, Harmonic.ai. Looks like they're looking to take on the likes of CB Insights, Crunchbase, PitchBook, all these companies you go to do research on startups. I think one of the interesting things that I saw that they're doing is they're actually tracking employee growth, which currently the only way I know of to do that is to scrape the company page on LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't even offer this via API. It's something that I've talked to quite a bit with Richard Stinnen that's really annoying is, because LinkedIn has most of the tech workforce, I'd say like within 95% of all the entire, at least the US, and European tech workforce. I know other countries use Facebook more, different cultures use different platforms for this, but yeah, it's really tough to do because tracking employee growth is a good way to track company growth also. It's a good good indicator for that. So I imagine
Harmonic, channel indicator.
Yeah, I imagine Harmonic is doing the same thing the rest of us are doing, and they're just scraping LinkedIn. So I don't know what LinkedIn's EULA looks like, but yeah, hopefully they don't get shut down for that, because there's a need. I don't know why LinkedIn doesn't just put it in their API and charge. But yeah. So something we talked about in the last interview with Dan, talking about privacy. So we'll leave the Microsoft one for later, but Apple and Google both got hit with basically the same class action lawsuit where they had features in their apps that said, do not track my location or do not track me in apps. And Apple basically interpreted that as do not track me in third-party apps. And they continued to track people and gather data in their first-party apps. And like a lot of stuff, like what they did in the App Store, what they searched for, what they tapped on, how long they looked at something before moving to a different screen. Like it's very detailed activity data from your iPhone.
Yeah, I feel like Yeah, it's got to be like all of iOS, but they've been pretty aggressive with disabling, not disabling, but making it opt-in to have cross-app tracking and all that, which has impacted, the likes of Facebook and so on type of advertisers. But because they don't share the data, it's like when it happens on the first-party software, then it's not doesn't count as tracking. So I don't really know that much about the details of the lawsuit, but I just find it a little bit distasteful that now they're shoving a lot of ads in the App Store, for example, on products. You pay $1,500 for a phone, and now you have ads in the App Store, but they're not coming from a third party. Whereas before, Facebook was probably the biggest source of app install apps, because you could get very, very targeted distribution. But it's like while I'm very happy they're doing the privacy focused thing of restricting tracking, I'm not super happy that they seem to be doing that to capture that revenue for themselves by now becoming the market for these app install ads. So I think that's all part of that, and like it might be legal, but doesn't mean that it's nice. It's like when you buy a TV and there's ads on it and just paid like $3,000 for a TV. Like I just find that completely distasteful, and I hope at some point the market just does something about it.
It's a bad look. It's a bad look for a company who one of their pillars that they stand on is privacy, right? They've been big on that for a long time. They've been selling that point, and it's bad for them to get caught doing something like this, because it's a blow to that pillar, that privacy pillar that Apple has.
It is, but it's become so normalized in our society that people just accept it, and it's never going to stop because it's accepted. It makes money for businesses. It hurts consumers, and in the U.S., we're really not that concerned about it, unfortunately.
And
it's predatory.
We all know folks. I think we all know folks who have switched to iPhone specifically for privacy features, though.
Yeah, I think that's true, but the amount of money they make off of it, this is not going to stop. It's not going to stop unless it's regulated, and we don't have the same kind of history that they do in other countries. And as a result, we're less sensitive to it, we're less concerned about it, and it's going to continue until there is some sort of regulation. But I don't believe that in this country we're going to get there, because there's a lot of opposition to any sort of regulation like this. And there's too much lobbying and there's too much money. But there is an ethical and a moral obligation, I believe. But, I know that there are people who will argue with me on that. But I do think there's a legal or a moral and an ethical obligation to be more privacy minded.
Which is why we've got to have the legislation, right?
I'm crossing my fingers. I'm not hugely hopeful that anything even as close to GDPR is going to pass in this country. I think the CCPA is the closest that we have. I don't think a federal law is going to come close to that. And CCPA, the legislators in California, are already opposing the ADPPA for that reason, because it is a watered down version of what they have.
For a company like Google or Apple, I don't think it has to, because they've got so many customers in California. It might as well be federal. Like I can't see them making a version of their products just for California, right?
I can totally see legislation though coming in and just making it harder for everyone else, right? Like those that are big enough to not share data because they've got all of it, it's just going to cement their position. So I wonder how a law could go about restricting the data like at the collection level instead of more at the sharing level. That would be interesting. But like every time you add more regulations, typically the big ones are able to abide by it, within a few months. They've got lots of money, lots of people to throw at it. They find these loopholes, and then the smaller ones get hurt.
It's
so
the loopholes. Yeah, for sure. It's the loopholes. The ADPPA does actually address what kind of data can be collected. And I was just over in Europe for the Gartner conference, and every time I got on a website there, I was asked, and I could say no, and I could still get onto the websites. That doesn't happen as much over here because we don't have those protections in place. But even what the limitations are in the ADPPA proposal provide loopholes, quote, under certain circumstances, with certain conditions. So the big guys are always going to get around it, and the big guys are always going to be the most egregious abusers because they can.
So what you're saying is we should all get VPNs and browse the internet through Ireland?
Don't get me started on VPNs and privacy, man. We don't have another 2 hours.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. So yeah, speaking of smartphones, because we didn't talk about Google as much in there, but similar thing where when you check the box that said "Don't track my location," Google was still tracking your location. So another big settlement there, $391.5 million settle. Not big for Google, but settlement with 40 states. So something I was experimenting with is also story number 31, where I knew these minimalist phones and devices existed, but I decided to pick one up. So I've got the Light Phone 2 here. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that on camera, but for people listening, I'm trying to hold it up to the camera. But you can go to thelightphone.com and see what it looks like. It's tiny, it has an e-ink display, and it's designed to make you not want to use it, which the short version of my review is absolutely, I hate it. I tried using the podcast app, and it works, but the app will just crash in the middle of a podcast, and I have to go back, relaunch it, and find where I left off. Absolutely makes me not want to use it, but it's a 4G phone. It has apps to do directions, hotspot. You can play music. You can put notes in there, leave voice notes because typing on it is awful. But it does what it says on the tin. It makes you not want to use it, but it still gives you kind of a functional modern phone where you can text and call and do some basic necessities. No web browser, anything like that. But yeah, so number 31 is a story on a school, a small boarding school in Massachusetts, I believe, where all the students were given one of these light phones, and they had to kind of turn in their smartphone. And the idea was to, kind of experiment, see if they could make kids more present in classes and things like that. And a lot of students, I don't know how honest the students are being here, right? And these are high school age students, say that they like it. They kind of like not being worried about what people are posting on Instagram, for example. Yeah,
or getting constant notifications vibrating somewhere, and it can be stressful.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's stressful, but it's also addicting. So it's like you kind of get pulled into the cycle. So yeah, I'm going to see if I can get maybe some of my kids to try this out for a week to swap devices and just see what they think. It's $30 a month, comes with its own SIM and service that I think is based on AT&T's network. But yeah, I'm always trying out new gadgets, and that happens to be one of them. So some interesting trends here. I think it's interesting. Twitter's kind of a special case here, so it's not exactly fair to call this a trend yet. But it's interesting that some key executives, including the chief compliance officer and the chief information security officer, quitting at Twitter is seen as a worrisome trend by the FTC. yeah, maybe that means, I don't know if it necessarily means the CISO has more power. I don't know. How do you see this, Guillaume?
Well, I think, for the regulators, it's obvious that there's chaos, and when there's chaos, there's risk. So I think it's just that, right? Like, there's so many things changing at the same time, so many people leaving. How are they going to be able to do everything that they did before and report on the stuff that they did before, right? Something's going to break there, right? Like, we've seen from a public facing point of view, we've seen like notifications get completely broken, SMS two-factor get completely broken. So why would these internal processes that we don't see still be working fine? I think that's doubtful. So, hopefully you never sent anything super critical via DMs.
Yeah, I might need to review those.
Well, yeah, good news is you can't delete them. So, well, you can, but when someone messages you again, the whole thread reappears. So maybe if both people delete the thread on their end, it gets deleted, maybe not. So OPSEC doesn't work retroactively, right?
I don't know if it's a rumor, if it was officially announced, but they're talking about DMs being end-to-end encrypted, being a thing in the near future. So that would be a rare win for Twitter. Yeah,
but they've been talking about that for like 8 years, and so now that they don't have a single developer left, they're going to do it. I have my doubts.
Yeah, they're talking about speaking of not having developers left, they're talking about bringing Vine back. Yeah, and some of the original Vine founders are like, not sure how good that it's going to be to fire up that code after 10 years, but go for it. But I mean, I don't want to waste too much air on Twitter, because it's probably all changing right now as we're talking about it. So not sure there's a whole lot of value in spending too much time on it. But Katie, are you on Mastodon now?
I'm not. I do have to check that out, though, because I am no longer on Twitter.
Yeah, I knew you were no longer on Twitter, so I was curious if that coincided with you creating an account on Mastodon, or if you were just done with Twitter.
I'm just done with Twitter. It's TBD. If there's another platform that has good reach, that is, valuable to the community, to the security community, that's the only reason I was on Twitter in the first place. It certainly wasn't for personal reasons. It was for professional reasons. Then I definitely explore it. But, I just can't support what's going on at Twitter right now. And if something else steps up to take its place, I am more than open to it.
Yeah, migration of InfoSec Twitter to Mastodon is actually pretty impressive. I think there's like 18,000 accounts on infosec.exchange, or maybe it even crossed 20,000. And then what's the other one? IOC.exchange is at like 15,000 or something like that. So there's something like 50,000 people on the two major InfoSec related instances, and then there's people on the bigger, more general instances, and then a bunch of people like me just running our own instances. So getting good engagement there, like good discussions, good content. So honestly, haven't really been paying attention to Twitter.
Yeah. I thought I was going to hear a ration from my PR person when I told her. And she was like, "Oh no, good call. I deleted my Twitter too." And I was like, "Okay." I thought I was about to get in trouble.
Well, so one thing I don't want to do is to delete it, because then I'm afraid someone can come in and create an account with the same username and then start impersonating me. So I don't think I'll ever delete it, but it's just I'm not using it much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly have a ton less engagement over there, and I'm getting more and more on the Mastodon side. I'm also on infosec.exchange, which took me a bit to learn, like with it decentralized. It's a bit confusing on like how you reply to things that are posted on different instances. Like, people will send me links to things in Slack and places like that. When I click them and they open on that instance, I can't reply there. I have to actually copy the URL, paste it into search on infosec.exchange, and then I can reply to it. from my instance. So
that's
things like that are. It's a little.
It's a problem when you receive a link. Well, I mean, it's like not the best UI, but when you're in your timeline, though, it's actually pretty sleek. And now with version 4 that just got released, you can follow hashtags, which is pretty cool, right? So you can follow the threat intel hashtag or infosec hashtag, because since there's no federated search, it's kind of hard to discover stuff sometimes, especially if you're on your own instance. Like, I don't see the local timeline of infosec.exchange, for example. So that's one thing where I was thinking, well, if I was on that instance, I would see a lot more traffic. But now with the hashtags following, it's better. And then the problem you just mentioned, like replying from somewhere else, when you want to follow someone, it's also much easier to just type their username in your search box and follow from there than clicking follow on another instance, because then it prompts you for your username, and then there's an exchange between the two instances, and it's kind of slow especially if one of the two instances is having issues, which is the case for a lot of them right now because there's just too many new people. So yep, that search box or URL box, or I guess it's both, is your best friend if you're getting started with Mastodon.
And I would bet, if the folks over there are smart, they're watching the market, they're watching what's happening, and they're not going to sit on this. They're going to innovate, they're going to adapt.
But it's open source. I think there's only 2 full-time developers on this, so I think it's already very impressive what they've made, and they're very responsive. So there's a GitHub issue where we're discussing like right now, you need to add a TOTP two-factor before it allows you to add security keys, but it supports multiple security keys, right? So what I did was I added my keys and I just deleted my TOTP. Like I didn't keep it anywhere, and they're very engaged, but it's open source and there's only so much a single person can do in a day. So, but maybe that will grow, right? Because now it's going to get like such an influx of users. The one place where I think there's going to be some improvement too is mobile clients. There's a lot of mobile clients that hadn't been updated in like 18 months or whatever, but now that there's a lot more people using them, maybe there's more incentive for developers making these. So we'll see. Like I don't think it's going to take a huge chunk of Twitter out, but if it takes all of InfoSec Twitter out, I don't like personally. It meets my needs, and it's actually a nicer experience in many ways. It reminds me of the forum days. No algorithm shoving stuff in your face. You just have the threads of the people and the hashtags you follow, and so it is nice.
Yeah, I will check it out. You've sold me.
All right, I'll collect my commission.
your commission from the open source sale.
Exactly.
I bring it up because with all the InfoSec people on it, of course, researchers are looking at it, and some security issues and bugs are. We're probably going to see a lot of updates of, and we already have been seeing some updates of Mastodon. So, like the instances that a lot of people are using are just running on people's hardware. Like volunteers are just running these instances. Kind of like the old days of. This isn't SaaS at all. Almost the old
right,
days
like
of running.
Jerry Bell, who runs InfoSec.exchange, has thrown some massive hardware at this. So if you're using those instances, maybe send your $8 to your admin instead of Elon.
Yeah. The other trend I wanted to mention here, that again, like Twitter, this could be more of an anomaly than a trend, but I thought it was interesting seeing what obviously looks like FTX employees trying to shovel money out of regulators' reach, trying to pull stuff out of the company before it gets grabbed by the bankruptcy process, which they're Chapter 11, not Chapter 7, so that means restructuring, not liquidation. But it was funny to see them say, "Oh, we got hacked and a bunch of money went missing." $200 million or whatever it was. But I can't imagine that holding up and becoming much of a trend. There's my dog ate my homework equivalent, right?
There's a few Twitter threads and Mastodon threads going around about like contents of the bankruptcy filing, and you don't have to be you don't have to be the type of people that reads bankruptcy filings all the time to be interested in this. There's some really funny stuff in there. Like, for example, their process for expenses was apparently to post something in a Slack channel, and then some not clearly defined set of people would give it a thumbs up or some other emoji to say that it was approved or not. And I thought it was really funny. You work for a 3 people small business and you have a more strict expense reporting process than that. Then the whole thing about like buying houses for employees and all of that, it's just wild. So I think we're going to keep hearing about this for the next few weeks or months with more and more details. It really sounds like a 10-episode Netflix special in the making right before our eyes.
Hulu's the one that does all these. They did the Adam We Were
Theranos one was on Hulu in the States. I think it was on Disney Plus here.
It was Hulu here.
Yep, so that's definitely going to happen in a few years.
It's craziness. All right, and we got a few squirrel stories here that we'll cover real quick. The first one, story number 37 here, I'm just going to cover briefly. I actually watched a whole hour and 10-minute talk by this guy. He's a professor at UC Berkeley, Nicholas Weaver. Big, outspoken anti-cryptocurrency guy. Has some really good points. I think maybe it's better to read an interview with him. I found listening to him a little harsh. Not because the things he was saying was harsh, but he's drinking a soda through it, and the all the sloshing of the soda gets and the slurping gets picked up by the microphone. It was it was a bit rough to listen to if you're triggered by slurping ASMR, like I apparently am. But he's very geeky. Makes a lot of jokes that are going to make you groan, but has some very, very good points, and very comprehensive coverage of why cryptocurrency doesn't make sense. The downsides of, and he does hit on some of the upsides and some of the advantages of it as well. But that's a very short list. And then the last one here, I don't even know how to pronounce the name of this company, but you kind of have to click it and go to the LinkedIn post.
Is it Lemon Tricks?
Lemon Tricks. That works for me.
I'm going to place my bets on Lemon Tricks. $5 Canadian.
It looks like a company I would buy cheap gloves from on Amazon. The Chinese company that just have random characters as the name of the company. That sell
I thought those were Roman numerals. It's not a number.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's anyway, it's an interesting post because they are an MDR MSSP company, and the post is kind of making fun of MSSPs, and the criticism is valid, but it's a bold move. They got to be really good to be able to pull off this level of shade throwing, I think.
Yeah, it's easier to throw shade when you don't have any skin in the game, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know anything about this company, how young they are, California-based company. Yeah, I don't know. What'd you call it? Lemon Trick?
I was hoping that on their About Us page they would have a pronunciation, but they don't.
Yeah. So last time
we're just gonna call it Lemon Tricks forever. That's decided.
Okay.
I hope it's really wrong, because then it's much funnier. But maybe it's right.
Oh my God! Have you seen the website?
I'm on the website.
Oh boy, that front page, Guillaume, have you seen it?
Boy.
No. Oh wow! There's a radar, the XDR radar.
Move
Zero
your mouse
hype
around.
at the bottom left. Oh,
Zero hype.
Yeah.
What is this front page if not hype? Oh my God!
And they've got a faux Rubik's cube, and
what
is
is
this
following
this
my
Flash?
mouse cursor around?
Reminds me of Flash websites
Is
from the
this
past.
Flash?
Oh, they've got the iceberg underwater too. The bigger iceberg underwater.
Oh boy. That's a lot. That's glass houses, folks. Glass houses.
There's a hard drive, like spinning metal hard drive at some point, which is pretty cool. Haven't seen one of those in a while.
They claim to do a lot of stuff. If you hit the what we do at the top, like that's a big list of stuff.
That it is a big list of stuff, and their story is actually quite long as well.
Lemon Tricks aligns with Gartner. That's comforting.
Well, I mean,
I have so much more confidence now. We can throw shade too.
Yeah, we can throw shade too. But my glass house is much smaller.
Yeah.
I also, with my finger, clicked on something and I have the code to their site and I can't make it go away.
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean it's not the worst we've seen, but yeah, I mean it's kind of like I was hoping we moved past like the pew pew map kind of age of InfoSec. And what was that Colorado-based company that hired the Tron designer to do their UI? ProtectWise. If you remember that UI, it was very much like the front page of this website.
Yeah, I remember that dashboard very clearly. I could probably draw it.
Oh, really? I remember it had the type of graph. I remember we used to call like a toilet bowl graph because it was a swirl.
Yeah, exactly. There's like two of those. The two toilet graph.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Why did you go to toilet instead of like soft serve? Come on.
But do you think it spins the other way around in Australia though?
But because it was actively spinning. Yeah, you have to update the UI so that south of the equator it spins in the other direction, right?
Yep.
All right. I think that's as silly as we need to get with this one, but yeah, I mean, I like seeing marketing kind of getting their elbows out, and I think we need to talk a little bit more honestly about some of the stuff. Yeah, MSSPs I still have kind of a hard time with. From direct firsthand experience testing them on behalf of customers, definitely did not instill a lot of confidence in this part of the market. I'm sure there's good ones out there. I just haven't encountered it. All right. And on that note, thanks so much.
And on that note, I just don't know what to say anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie and Guillaume for joining me today. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, extra thanks to Guillaume for he found out he was going to be co-host on this podcast less than an hour before we went. So
yeah, I was literally hooking up the microphone 1 minute before joining. Yep.
Heroic effort.
That's
we
how
appreciate
roll.
it. That is how we roll. Yeah, we can handle last minute stuff and still pull off a good show. All right. Big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Are we going to be back next week, or is next week Thanksgiving? We will not be back.
I'm going to be in tryptophan coma.
Yep. Likely me too. And we will be back on December 1st. So taking a week off for Thanksgiving. Hope you folks, if you celebrate a holiday next week, enjoy the time off. Time with family and friends. We're thankful for all of you, and we'll see you in December when we come back.